Dario Sneidermanis is an Argentinian Bitcoiner and the creator of Muun Wallet. Muun, spelled with 2 U's, is an extremely easy to use Bitcoin wallet available on both Android and iPhone, allowing people around the world to easily use Bitcoin from the comfort of the mobile phones they already own. Seems unfortunately we have a protest going on right now. Hopefully it doesn't bleed into into the audio of the interview, you know.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
It is what it is, right? You can't choose when there's a protest. So Dario, you were born in Argentina.
Yes.
Do you still live in Argentina?
I do, yeah.
How has, as an American to an Argentinian, how has growing up in Argentina, how do you think it's shaped your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, it changed a bit, the situation in Argentina in the last 30 years. We had, at least I think, 3 different stages, if you will. The first 10 years were economically, they were pretty good. The Argentinian peso was a stable coin. It was tied 1-to-1 to the dollar at the time. Yeah, it was pegged. So I think those were the good times in the last 30 years. But then in 2001, there was a really big event. The economy was really bad, and the country was running out of US dollars. So from 1 week to the next, everyone's accounts in the bank got frozen. You could only withdraw up to, I think, $300 per week. And if you had any dollars in the bank, that was from the pesos accounts, but if you had any dollars, they were completely frozen. And that situation escalated throughout a year until at some point you couldn't withdraw any money.
And there was no warning. There was no warning.
No warning. Everyone's savings frozen. So it was a really bad year. I think in that year we got 5 presidents in 2 weeks. It was crazy.
Really?
Yeah. And I think that from that point forward, the situation fluctuated a bit, but it was always pretty bad. There's a lot of, the peso started inflating a lot. So, I don't know, this year we're going to have probably 60% inflation. So
60% inflation this year?
Yeah, this year. So that means that prices are changing all the time. If you go abroad for a couple months and you go back, then you don't know what the prices are. You get used to it eventually. You get used to thinking in multiple currencies at the same time. Everyone knows in the street what the current exchange rate for the dollar between the peso is. And you actually have even multiple exchange rates because there's the official one, which no one can get really.
Right.
And then you have the black market one.
So the official one is just,
yeah,
they just say it, but it doesn't. You can't use it.
I think buy up to $200 per month using the official rate.
But through a bank or something.
Yeah, through a bank, but not many people do. And so then you have a whole range of different dollars. You have the black market dollar, you have the Bitcoin dollar, which is the one that you get if you buy in a Bitcoin exchange, and you have these many things. So I think it gives you a mental model to deal with a lot of uncertainty. People don't know, they can't save in pesos, so they do some crazy things. They save in TVs or fridges, or
TV, they buy televisions.
Yeah, they buy televisions. They buy anything that's going to be more stable than the peso, which is almost everything. So crazy things happen in the Argentinian economy. So yeah, I think that we're used to living with a lot of currency controls. The government is super strict on what you can do with your money. At times it's really hard to move money in or out of the country. So you start not relying on institutions. There's super low trust on banks, on the government. So it's really tough to know what to do with your money. A lot of people like storing your money under the mattress is a super common phrase in Argentina, and it actually happens.
But they're not storing pesos.
No,
it's
US
dollars.
Yeah, I think Argentina is the largest holder of physical dollars, like cash, in the world, because people just like want to have, the only thing that they trust is the $100 bill, and yeah, so with time you get crafty on how to deal with all these things and try alternative methods for storing your money, for investing, for moving your money around, for buying stuff. There's a lot of common knowledge about when to buy stuff and when not to buy stuff, and I think that it's even pretty different from other countries in South America. It's quite a special culture regarding money and regarding how you relate with institutions.
Like just because the money's been so bad for so long.
Yeah, exactly. And there's like people already know how to deal with this.
Right.
So if you go, say, to Brazil, which is next to Argentina, you're going to see that when money starts to inflate, people start saving because they have a lot of uncertainty. In Argentina, it's the other way around. They already know how this behaves, so they start buying stuff because the money burns, because it's losing value day to day. So there's all this culture around how do you deal with inflation, which I think it's really interesting because in a way right now Argentina is like a first mover, because many other parts of the world are starting to see inflation, and as Argentinians we're seeing how they are starting to learn about the side effects of inflation, which is super interesting because we see them firsthand every day.
Super experienced.
Yeah, exactly. So for once, Argentina is ahead. But yeah, other than that, I think it's a really interesting mix because you have all these problems, but at the same time, you have a super developed culture. There's a lot of talent in Argentina. There's a really good infrastructure compared to other places that may not have good institutions. And so everyone has internet. There's a high penetration of smartphones, so people can access the internet. They are educated, and so they understand a lot of things of both what's going on inside the country and outside the country. So yeah, I think it's a perfect breeding ground for some of the things and the technologies we're seeing right now, such as Bitcoin. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing right now so high penetration of these technologies, because people not only understand them but also need them. And there's like you have to explain much less things to an Argentinian about why you need to have your money in a way that no one can touch it, that no one can freeze it, and why you need to be careful with where you put your money. On the other hand, there's when people are willing to try a lot of new things, there's more failure cases. People make mistakes.
Right.
We recently have a really big, not good, event with all. There was a currency that was supposedly 1-to-1 to the dollar and had like really good. It looked like a really good investment opportunity, and for some reason it went like fire in Argentina.
Right.
And a lot of people put their savings in there.
Oof.
So you have to be like. On the other hand, you have to be extra careful.
You're more vulnerable because
exactly.
Because your institutions have failed you, so you're doing everything on your own, so you become more vulnerable.
And your trust structures went down, and you don't know what to trust. You don't have the institutions. You don't know who is telling the truth, who is not, and so it's really tough. And you really have to take like a first principles approach, where you try to understand, well, like, how does this work? Which I think is a thing that's been promoted a lot in the last years by Bitcoiners and people in the industry. I think it stems from a different place, but it reaches the same conclusions. So,
I mean, so the two of us are both part of this global Bitcoin community. Yeah. Do you feel like a strong disconnect? Do you feel a strong disconnect with American Bitcoiners or European Bitcoiners as an Argentinian?
That's a good question. I think that I feel more connection to Bitcoiners in general because they are thinking about these issues, even if theoretically it's hard for someone that's lived their entire lives in a country where everything works to understand how it feels when things don't work, because you can reason about it in a theoretical level, but seeing it is quite different. And there's all these second order effects. There's other things that happen because of this that are super hard to anticipate when you don't see them firsthand. So yeah, I think that it's much easier to explain non-custodianship and understand truly why it's important as an Argentinian than maybe as a European or an American.
Holding your own Bitcoin, not letting an institution hold your Bitcoin.
Exactly. So non-custodianship is this property of not having anyone be able to either move your money or freeze your money, which is something that it was how money worked 500 years ago, right. Like all money.
Or it's like how cash works.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so I think in the last 500, 600 years, we lost these properties in order to get some others, in order to be able to travel without all your gold bars right. on you and that kind of stuff. And so right now we are super used to that. We don't question it. If it works, you don't question it. But now we have the technology to have something that has the best of both worlds, like a money that can't be frozen, that can't be moved by a government when they decide to move it for whatever reason. But at the same time, it's safe to use and all the stuff you expect from having your money in your bank. So yeah, I think that it's easier for an Argentinian to understand, but it's not impossible for an American or a European to empathize with it. It's just a little bit more work. You have to question.
Yeah, this whole beginning education part instead of living the experience.
Exactly. You need to question a few things that you give for granted, but eventually you get there. And
I mean, I think your comment about Argentinian use of cash, specifically U.S. dollars, which in the traditional money sense is the closest thing you get to self-custody Bitcoin of holding your own Bitcoin. There's a sharp disconnect there because, I mean, I was just at the Oslo Freedom Forum and I was doing a panel on the dangers of central bank digital currencies. And I asked the audience a question, right? And I asked the audience the question was, if you use fiat money, if you use your local currency, do you use cash more than you use digital money? Do you use cash more than you use credit cards or payment apps? And maybe 1% of people raise their hand saying they use cash more, right? But if that was in Argentina, you don't even have the option to use the digital money apps, really, right? You just end up getting screwed.
Yeah, so you have different use cases. So what people want to do with the cash is store it. They use it for savings. They don't want to spend it usually, because that's the hard money for them. That's the money that they know that it's not going to devaluate, that they know they can control. They see where it is, they can touch it, and so they understand it. And so they spend mostly the pesos that they are earning. They spend the credit cards if they use them. But I think that it's not that common to pay with cash in dollars in cash in Argentina. It's super common to use cash though. 50% of the population is like operating in the black market or outside the system. Like 50% of the economy. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Like that means that most companies are outside of the system, and so you cannot rely on banks. Like even if they work right now, like you can never know how much more they will work. But
is it a class divide? Can like rich people rely on banks, or just nobody can
for
rely
sure,
on banks?
it depends on whether you are working in a like formal work relationship and it's all by the book, which is like 50% of the population can access this. Still, that part of the population, there's a huge percentage of that population that doesn't have money in the banks, even though they could, because they don't trust them, because they've been burned before. Like everyone that has at least 25 years in Argentina has seen firsthand how it felt when you lose all the money and they take all your money away and they start putting restrictions. And even today, there are a lot of restrictions for moving the money in and out of the country.
What are the current restrictions?
So if you're bringing US dollars from outside the country into Argentina, you're forced to sell them at the official rate, which is half its value.
So that's the only time you get the official rate is when
exactly. So you the base is that you lose half your money just to do that, and then you have to pay taxes on the remaining stuff, and you appear in like you start being tracked by the governments, and there's always these promises that they are not going to do anything with that information, but then the government changes, and then 4 years later, you get all the restrictions that people promise that you wouldn't have, and so it's super tough to get money inside the country. People are starting to use Bitcoin and crypto a lot for that. And then depending on your industry, there might be different restrictions. There's a really big industry in selling, like exporting vegetables and beef and that kind of stuff, and they have like super hard regulations. They lose like 70-80% of the value. It goes to the government. And it changes month to month.
Like right now, is there a limit right now on how much money you can send outside the country?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
But there could be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's all these complex rules and they're changing all the time, so it's really difficult to navigate. It creates a really big incentive for multinational companies not to come to Argentina, because it's so hard that even if they come, eventually they go away because
just impossible
it doesn't make
there.
sense. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. It's crazy.
So with your personal story, when does Bitcoin enter your story?
Sure. So the first time I heard about Bitcoin was in 2011. With some friends in college, we were...
Were you in college in Argentina?
Yeah, in college in Argentina. A friend of mine told me about it, sent me a link to the paper. I read it, and it was beautiful. And I remember thinking, well, this might even work. But I didn't give it... I didn't do much with it at the time. Because I was with other things and I didn't pay that much attention, and it didn't seem that it was something real at the time. And then 2 years later, in 2013, there was a really big conference, Bitcoin conference in Argentina, the Latin American, I think it was the first Latin American Bitcoin conference. And a lot of people came from all over the world, and I went there and I started seeing that it was something real. Other people were working on this, other people were doing stuff and thinking about it. And so I started to get a lot more involved and starting to think about how it could fit. Like Bitcoin is so different from everything else that it takes you a little bit to understand the basics and how it fits. And I think that a year or so later, I was working from Argentina remotely for a startup in the US. And they were paying me in dollars in the US. So I need to bring the money into Argentina. And at the time, we couldn't bring any money. There were really strong currency controls. And so I used Bitcoin. I bought Bitcoin in the US and the Bitcoins and sold them bought Bitcoins and sold them in Argentina. And it was like a really magic moment. Like Bitcoin didn't care where I was, who I was. It just worked instantly. So that first moment is really special. And from that point forward, I started thinking like, hey, like this is awesome. It's an awesome technology, and you can actually solve a really social problem with technology, but it's super hard to use. Like I had to do too many things. I had to understand too many things, too many concepts in order to be able to do that, which was super simple. I just wanted to make one payment, and I had to go through all these hoops, and so. I started thinking about how can we make it so that everyone in Argentina can use this.
Right.
Like, at first, I started with a really Argentinian focus because I saw the problem. It was clear that they needed this technology. That's how I eventually started working on an application to make this easier, to make moving money without trusting anyone else easier, and with the hopes that eventually we're getting there, and there's still more work to be done, but eventually the idea is that everyone should be able to use this, even if they don't care about the technology, if they don't care about the details. It's just a tool, right? Like a hammer, this is just another tool, and it could be used for different reasons for different people.
It's interesting because it seems like for you and for other Argentinians, like Bitcoin solves two problems for you, right? It solves spending restrictions, and it solves being able to actually save your hard work.
Yeah, for sure. In Argentina, we have all the financial problems, I think. We have inflation, we have problems with the institutions freezing money, we have problems with restrictions moving the money. We have restrictions with what you can buy and sell, like what are the currencies you can buy. So I think that Bitcoin goes down all these layers, and instead of trying to fix the layers, it goes all the way around and it says, hey, like we can do this without all this infrastructure. Like this should be much easier. And so in a way, Bitcoin is much simpler than what all this system that we've been building for the last 100 years, layer after layer of banks and credit cards and payment processors and governments. Bitcoin just does away with everything and starts from the ground up with very clear principles, with a very clear design, and tries to create money that you can use without trusting anyone. I think it solves many of these problems for Argentinians. I think that the missing problem right now that Bitcoin doesn't address is volatility. So there's a lot of people, we see a lot of people that are living month to month.
Right.
And so recommending Bitcoin to them is irresponsible in a way, because it's a super volatile currency and it's going up, but in a frame of maybe 4 or 5 years. So if you're going to need to spend your money in the next month or so, then Bitcoin doesn't solve a problem for you. It could be pretty dangerous.
Even when like the alternative is a currency that's dropping 60% year over year.
Yes, because like if you spend your money like within 30 days, then inflation doesn't matter that much. It's not a super big problem. Like if you don't have savings, then it's not a big problem.
It's just like almost a guaranteed 8% down or something.
Exactly.
But cost of doing business.
Yeah, exactly. In Argentina, all the people factor that they're going to have inflation, and the system adapts.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I kind of was operating under the assumption that the volatility would feel less as a negative to people that are living in a complete their alternative is a complete failed currency.
Sure.
Essentially.
I think that there are some currencies that are in a much worse shape, and you might, like in periods of hyperinflation, like I think in '89, a year before I was born, that we had like hyperinflation in Argentina, and at that point, you cannot even like trust it for the next week because it's really, really bad. But for spending the day to day and like if you don't have savings, what the government currencies have kind of is that they are predictable. You kind of know what's going to happen. With Bitcoin, you don't. So that factors in like it gives it's reasonable to be fearful of what's going to happen in the next month with Bitcoin because no one knows.
It could go up 50%, it could go down 50%.
Exactly. And the risk of having your money slashed by 50% when you wake up is too big.
But that's kind of what happened in 2001, right?
For sure. Yeah, but so...
Where like the government just comes in, puts restrictions, says you can't pull your money out.
I believe that's why people in Argentina usually tend to seek dollars.
Right.
Because it's much more predictable. It has inflation now, but it's much smaller than the Argentinian peso.
Compared to what you're used to, there's no inflation.
Exactly. So maybe eventually Bitcoin will stabilize if it grows enough. I don't know. We'll see what happens. There's many things have to happen before we get to that point. But I guess it could happen eventually. And at that point, it might make sense to go all in on Bitcoin. But yeah, you can. There's some companies right now exploring using Bitcoin as a payment network and maybe having US dollars inside of it. That has some trust involved. You are trusting someone, but in Argentina, people usually prefer to trust like a foreign company than their government. It's so bad in there that almost anything is better than trusting the government and the local banks.
They'd rather a foreign company.
Yeah. Or
foreign company, foreign central bank, like the full foreign stack.
I mean, they are saving in US dollars, and so they are trusting the US central bank. And I guess that's for the risk profile of an Argentinian, that's a good enough risk to take. But I think we can do better. Eventually, we should do better than even having to trust any central bank.
Yeah, I mean, my hope is that as adoption increases with Bitcoin, as more money, as more purchasing power goes into Bitcoin, volatility should kind of
definitely
level
and it's
out.
happening.
It's a time thing.
Like volatility is slowly going down. It's going to take a while. It's a multi-decade process, but we have patience.
We'll see.
Yeah.
It seems like the protest has now turned into a concert. I hope it's not picked up on the mic too much, but got to respect people's freedom to protest.
For sure.
As an Argentinian, do you think it's possible for people to have freedom without good money?
I don't think so. I mean, money is the building block for a lot of human interaction and activities, and so in a capitalist world, capital and money is super important. And if someone has control of your money, it has control on your actions. Like people do crazy things when their money is at stake. So I think that to have true freedom, you really need to not have to be thinking about the repercussions on your money of your actions in the real world. So that's actually, I think it's a combination. You need a combination of basic building blocks. You need money, but you also need privacy, right? Because even if you have a really good technology for money, the government can come to your door and force you to freeze your money. So there's a couple of building blocks that you need in today's world for true freedom. Freedom to protest, like here, freedom to express and So yes, up to now I don't think we've seen many successful experiments of creating a money in the modern times that actually enables freedom for people and that enables them to do whatever they want to do with the money or with the words or with their actions. I think that Bitcoin is a really interesting experiment. I don't know if it's going to succeed. I hope it does, but there's still many challenges ahead. But at least we're trying. It's a really interesting experiment. And even if it fails, I think the idea and the stuff we learned along the way about how money should work and how institutions should work and who you should trust, because at the end of the day, it's a question of trust. I think if Bitcoin doesn't succeed, something will eventually.
So you would disagree with Bitcoiners that think that Bitcoin's inevitable?
I don't think Bitcoin is inevitable because there's still many challenges. We had to solve many problems ahead. Like we haven't faced the worst enemies of Bitcoin yet.
Not even close.
So yeah, exactly. So it's a hard assumption to say that we're going to win all of those battles, but we're going to try. We're going to give our best.
But what's your biggest concern? Do you have one on the top of your head?
Yeah, right now I think Bitcoin scaling. Like Bitcoin processes like 7 transactions per second. So that's and Visa processes like 10,000 transactions per second and 40,000 in peak times. So we are like at least 3 zeros away from that kind of processing power. We have right now a new technology called the Lightning Network, which helps a little, but maybe it gives us like 1 more zero, maybe 2.
Really? That's all you think?
Yeah.
You think it only brings you to like 700 transactions per second?
Yeah, because for new, like it works really well between, say, 2 exchanges that they're exchanging money all the time. You never have to close your channels, which is this Lightning concept of like making a Bitcoin transaction in the Bitcoin chain. Like it's super infrequent. But for end users, it's super frequent because they like if you have Lightning in a phone, the funds that are locked in those channels, the liquidity that is being used is mostly useless because they're offline all the time and you're not using it. So you have to close channels pretty frequently. And even if that weren't true, you need at least 1 transaction per person to open the first channel.
Right.
And so if you like, it would take like more than a decade to make 1 transaction per person in the world.
So you think the people that claim that Lightning is this beautiful scaling solution is not quite there yet?
It's great. I mean, Lightning is a super good technology. It works today, which is super important. There's still some work ahead to be done, but it works fairly well. It's just not a magical solution. It won't scale much more than that.
It still needs improvements as well. Like there could be
But we need to be thinking about scaling in every layer. Yeah, at the base chain, in Lightning, in other layers. I think that there are many ideas going around. It's not like it's impossible to do, but maybe it's common to think that Lightning solved scaling.
It's a solved problem.
Yeah, exactly, and it definitely isn't. Like we are seeing firsthand the limits of it.
So to kind of distill what I think you're trying to convey here is your main concern with Bitcoin right now is the idea of having as many people as possible be able to use Bitcoin in a fully sovereign way, where no company, no government can stop them from spending it, cannot stop them from seizing their money. We're not necessarily there yet.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, like the macro risk is that we get comfortable with how things are. We say like this, what Bitcoin is today is what Bitcoin is, and we stop working on scaling it and making it accessible in a really trustless way for everyone.
Right.
And we settle for Bitcoin banks, which is exactly the same thing that we had before, but with a interesting financial exposure,
right,
which wasn't the goal in the first place.
And like maybe, I mean, in that situation, you still have interoperability. They could transfer between each other, a little bit more competition,
exactly.
but still not ideal.
Yeah, and I mean, if this turns out to be like, if interoperability and openness turns out to be openness, I don't know, but interoperability at least turns out to be a good idea, then banks can copy it. Like they can get together and build an interoperable protocol between them. The thing that they cannot do is not hold people's money, because it hurts their business models and it hurts the entire idea of a bank, of what a bank does. And so I think that what gives Bitcoin value is the unique things that only Bitcoin can do. And having your money in a self-sovereign way is something that only Bitcoin can do it in the way that it does. And so in a way you could say that Bitcoin scales, self-custodianship doesn't.
Right.
And yeah, my biggest fear is that we sell for custodial solutions, Bitcoin banks.
Where you're trusting companies, trusting
Exactly.
governments.
And we end up in the same place where we started. So yeah, I think more scaling work is needed. But I hope that eventually when it starts to, like, on the other hand, Bitcoin has this like closed loop when Bitcoin starts to not scale because there's huge demand for transactions and there's the capacity, the processing capacity is fixed, fees go up. And so it starts to hurt and people start to realize that, hey, like maybe we should be working on getting fees lower.
Right.
So there's an incentive for all players like when it starts to hurt, to work on scalability. And it's also going to be a problem even for custodial companies.
Right. Because their costs will go up.
Yeah, exactly. So I hope that eventually, like everyone is going to align into the fact that we need to keep working on the problem.
Which kind of, I mean, it kind of goes back to your own personal experiences, right? Because, I mean, what I've noticed with Bitcoin is one of the key value props of Bitcoin is that it's this system that nobody controls, right?
Yeah.
And because nobody controls it, it's very hard to change.
Yeah.
So you only really see change when there's a lot of pain that's felt, when people get burned.
Yeah.
And in Argentina, that it's kind of a similar situation, right? Where people are getting burned and they seek out solutions to stop feeling the pain.
Yeah. Yeah, and at the same time, it's reasonable for Bitcoin to get harder and harder to change because that's a protection mechanism. It's the same mechanism that doesn't allow a government to come in and change things. So I think it's important to keep that property and to work with it. And eventually, as it starts to hurt, if everyone agrees that it's a problem and that we should be working on it, then I'm sure we will. But yeah, these things take time, and when it hurts now.
Right.
So I think it'd be interesting to start working now on at least the ideas of how we could make Bitcoin more scalable while keeping all these interesting properties of Bitcoin, right? Because it's easy to scale it if you give away some of the properties.
Right.
But yeah, I think that at least if you get every Argentinian on board in Bitcoin self-custodially, you already have a problem. So I do believe that there's a really big need, at least, 1-2 billion people really need self-custodianship and to have their money in a self-sovereign way. So I think we should, maybe it's not for everyone, but at least for these people, it's important that Bitcoin can solve the problem. And I don't know, we're working on it, going in that direction, but it's a hard problem, it takes time, and the Bitcoin community is super hardworking, and I think it's super focused on the right problems. So I hope that eventually we will go there. But I believe it's one of the biggest technical challenges right now. There are other challenges, non-technical, but yeah.
So let's talk about working on it.
Yep.
You have Muun Wallet with 2 U's, one of the most popular mobile wallets. You can run it on your phone. When did the vision for Muun Wallet occur to you? When did you decide to proceed forward with building Muun, and how are you inspired to make it what it is?
Sure. So it started after seeing the value firsthand, actually experiencing it. Like by that point, I had already read a lot about Bitcoin and thought a lot about Bitcoin, but experiencing it is something much more powerful. And so at the time, this was 2014, 2015. Argentina was in a really bad situation, so it was pretty clear that the problems were clear. That money didn't work in Argentina, banks didn't work in Argentina, and there's problems with money and banks everywhere in the world, but in Argentina, it was clear to everyone in the street. Like you go to anyone and ask them about it, and they're going to tell you pretty specifically what all the problems are. And so it started being a question of how can we use this technology to solve this real world problem for Argentinians. And eventually, as the idea progressed and we understood what the technology could do at that point, we, on the one hand, we realized about the global potential of this. Like Bitcoin works exactly the same if you're paying someone that's in front of you than if it's like in a country with restrictions and if it's in the other side of the world. So it became clear that we could do a solution that worked for many other places rather than only for Argentina. But at the same time, there was a clear need for a wallet that focused on people that don't know about Bitcoin, that don't know about the entire technology stack, which is like a lot of knowledge. Like you have to buy your first Bitcoins, you have to understand what an address is, what a wallet is, what a wallet isn't, what an exchange is, what the price is, how it fluctuates, what KYC is. There's so many concepts and things that people have not been exposed to before. So the idea was like, how can we make it so we get it to the point where it's just download this app and that's it. And so we've been working on that problem for many years now. I think that there's still many problems to solve ahead. People shouldn't be able to lose their money. Right now, like if you forget a password or a code that you wrote in a paper, then your money is gone. And you wouldn't accept that from a bank. Like if you go to an ATM and you forget the PIN, and you go to the bank teller and they say not your keys, not your money, not your PIN, not your money, you will kill them. So we need a way to get all these cool properties of money, but at the same time make it so that people just, no matter what they do, they can't lose the money. That it's super easy to use. I don't have to understand all the technology to use it. But it's been quite challenging. I think that when we started with Muun, most wallets were mostly a reflection of the protocol. And so what we try to do is tackle it, go from the other way around, try to understand what's the problem for the user, and then figure out, well, how close can we get with the technology? Rather than saying like, oh, Bitcoin can do all this stuff, let's put them all inside an interface and let people do everything. So I think that there's different wallets with different trade-offs for different audiences, and that's the beauty of Bitcoin. You can have many different products competing in an open market, and you have zero lock-in. Like you can move with 3 clicks, you can move your money from one wallet to the other. Most wallets work globally, so they are available to everyone, everywhere. And yeah, we try to work on that. We're trying to include a lot of people that maybe get left behind. Bitcoin started as an English-speaking phenomenon, and most of the content is in English, and most wallets are only in English, and most protocols even have error codes and that kind of stuff that are only in English. And so getting to the point where this access, like the way that people back up wallets today is only for English speakers.
You like write down English words.
Write those
something
English words.
As foundational
exactly,
as that. Yeah.
Exactly. And so we're trying to go back a little bit there and see what's the essence of the problem and how can we apply it in a language neutral way. And at the same time, Bitcoin is super complex. It can be a lot for newcomers. So having someone that you can speak to in the same language that you speak is super important. And so we've seen a lot of, this was something super important in El Salvador. I think it was the first time that we saw a lot of adoption growing quicker than education.
Because El Salvador had this legal tender law, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Bitcoin is now an accepted currency everywhere in El Salvador.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people.
6 million people just came into Bitcoin.
Yeah, from one day to the other. And some people wanted to, some others didn't. But everyone was exposed to this technology, and what they had mostly was questions. And so having like a support channel or someone that you can talk to inside the wallet in a language that you understand that can answer some basic things about how does this work, how do I do to not lose my money, and make them at ease and help them go at their own pace and understand at their own pace what Bitcoin is and what problems it solves. I think it's super important. So yeah, and there's many challenges to taking Bitcoin globally. But I think that Bitcoiners are super open to this, and they're willing to work on these problems. We just have to be careful with some biases.
What is your biggest pain point that you felt while you built Muun?
Yeah, I think that, well, there were many pain points. But I think that one of the most challenging things was having multiple audiences with different levels of understanding and balancing that. Like you have to make a product that at the same time works for someone that knows a lot about the technology and has really high expectations about how it should work and how it should look like, even what protocols you should be using. They have opinions about that. And at the same time, you have to cater to an audience that doesn't understand anything about how the technology works. And you have to be able to let them build mental models about how it works and let them relate it to stuff that they already know, like an email or a password. And so that was something that took us many years to understand how to navigate and how to make a product that works for many audiences at the same time. Then there's always a lot of technical challenges when you want to, when you start with a problem rather than with the technology or the solution, and you want to have a very specific UX, you have to take the technology to its limits. And so you're dealing with a lot of problems that might not have been explored before, or that maybe it falls in a place where no one has given it much thought yet. So that's an interesting challenge. But yeah, it's super interesting to work on that and see how we could take Bitcoin to its limits and also inspire us into how we could extend Bitcoin in order to gain new functionality and those kind of things.
The El Salvador situation is very interesting, I think, and could be very interesting from specifically as someone from a Latin American country.
Yeah.
Do you see any? Did you learn anything from El Salvador adopting Bitcoin as a national currency that you think could apply to maybe a potential situation in Argentina?
Definitely, yeah. We have many learnings from onboarding users and onboarding many users at once into Muun. One of the things that we weren't prepared for, like, we always had the advantage of either onboarding people that already know about Bitcoin, right, or that have someone next to them telling them about Bitcoin. It's
always easier if you have a friend or
yeah,
family member
exactly.
or
if you know someone that knows about Bitcoin and you ask them, they will speak to you for 3 hours straight and tell you all the ins and outs of Bitcoin and how it works and what problems it solves, which is great. I think it's the best way to get into Bitcoin. But if you don't have that, then there's many things that you can't assume that the person that's getting onboarded to the wallet knows. And so we were, for example, when you go to the receipt screen in Muun, you go to receive Bitcoins. We had 2 tabs that make you you have to make a decision on which protocol you're going to use. Either you use traditional Bitcoin or Lightning. And we had a lot of people that didn't know what Lightning was and saying, like, what's this other coin? Right. Like, you have Bitcoin and Lightning. And so it started pushing us in ways that we hadn't faced with before, which is super interesting. And I think it will be useful everywhere to get work on those problems and make it much more clear to users. Then we had the many users that didn't speak English, and we started seeing more of these multi-language problems. There are new protocols right now for making Lightning payments that are designed in a way where if you get an error, if say you want to make a payment to a site online which implements this protocol, it's called LNURL. The developer writes the error code that it's going to be shown to the user, but they are mostly writing these things in English. And so we have a really tough challenge of how do we deal with that for people that don't speak in English.
Right, they speak Spanish,
exactly.
The payment fails, and then the error is in English,
exactly.
And they have no idea what the hell's going on.
Exactly. So that's a tough challenge that no one is speaking about. And another thing that when you go fully global, like truly fully global, you're dealing sometimes in countries like Argentina that don't have a clear exchange rate. And so this happens in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Lebanon, in India right now. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into saying how much a Bitcoin is or a dollar is in those countries.
How do you handle that?
We try to ask locals how do they solve it for them, what sites they use, and we try to have as many sources of truth as possible, and try to like average it out.
And to be clear, Muun with 2 U's does not hold. It doesn't hold your local currency. It only holds Bitcoin, but it'll show the equivalent amount. It'll show how much that Bitcoin is worth.
Yeah, exactly. Because when people want to make a payment, they usually think about the unit of account, the unit that they use to express how much money they want to send is usually denominated either in the local currency or in some reserve currency. So it's really important that the wallet can make this conversion automatically. And it looks like a super small thing to do, but it's quite challenging to do at scale, especially in some countries. And And yeah, there's all these small points of friction that you find out when you onboard different users and new users. So we're learning a lot all of the time. And I guess El Salvador was a really big stress test. Many people using it at the same time. I think it was a really big success case for the Lightning Network, especially. I'm not aware of any other point in time where it was used at such scale by unexperienced users successfully. So I think in that sense it went pretty well. But there's always stuff to learn and to improve and work to be done to make it better for the next El Salvador.
You would say El Salvador, the rollout in El Salvador, for the most part, was a massive success.
I think so, yeah. Depending on what layer you look at it, like technologically, I think it went pretty well. Socially, I don't think so.
Right.
I think there were many problems socially. Like Bitcoin is usually a grassroots movement. It
Right.
goes from the people. And in El Salvador, it went the other way around. Like
But not really. I mean, I like to think of it as a grassroots movement that grew so big that the government couldn't ignore it, and then they chose to adopt it.
Sure.
Right, because you had that Bitcoin
It
beach.
definitely started
people
like a
started
grassroots
accepting
movement.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, but many people found themselves with a lot of questions and thinking that they were forced to deal with Bitcoin and accept Bitcoin when they didn't even know what it was, and they were really scared. And I think that it could have been done better with much more education, with much more clarity around what would be expected of merchants, say like small merchants.
Right.
For a big merchant, they can adapt and work with it. So I think that maybe doing it a little bit more gradually with more education would have been better.
But from your perspective, Moon,
Yep.
your project, was successful.
Definitely.
rollout.
And we even had like there's an official wallet in El Salvador that's maintained by the government, and it's actually like a Bitcoin bank. And we had especially like really high penetration with the people that were opposed to the government, because they with all this new law, they got down in Bitcoin and learned a lot and understood the reasons why Bitcoin really existed. And as the government was freezing their bank accounts, they were using Bitcoin to bypass the government. So I guess in a way it was a good ending. And these people got to learn about a tool that can help them fight against the government when they need to. Protect themselves, not fight. I think that there's still a lot of work that's needed with Lightning on reliability. Like many payments fail. So we should, and it's a cross-cutting problem. It touches the protocol, it touches the ecosystem, it touches the exchanges that are integrating Lightning Network, the wallets. And so a lot more work there is needed, but other than that, I'd say it was a resounding success.
On the topic of language confusion,
Yeah.
what was the thought process about naming your app Moon spelled incorrectly in English?
Yeah. I'm really a fan of things that have multiple meanings at the same time. And so there was this phrase in the Bitcoin community of to the moon early on. So that was one inspiration for it. And it turns out that there's a Star Wars race that they're called the Moons. And they are the creators and the founders of the intergalactic banking clan. And they are really good at math and finance. And when we realized about that, it was like, this is a perfect name. And I think that like thinking about, like you can think around Bitcoin, like building an intergalactic money system. Like Bitcoin might even work outside of planet Earth.
But they spell it with two U's in that?
Yeah, they are spelled with two U's.
So do you have any regrets spelling it that way?
I think it became a meme.
It became a meme because I had to say it every week on my podcast.
Exactly.
Moon with 2 U's.
Yeah,
Moon with 2 U's.
I think in retrospect, it might not have been the best name. But yeah.
Well, thank you for answering the single most important question today. So we're talking about Argentinians accepting Bitcoin, using Bitcoin. Do you have any idea of how many Argentinians are using Bitcoin right now?
I don't know really. I think that there's in Argentina there's a lot of people using crypto. I think I've seen recent statistics that they're around like 30% penetration.
But you're including stable coins
that's stable coins, Ethereum, and Bitcoin. There was
Do you think Bitcoin's the most popular down there, or?
I think stable coins are the most popular because of all this idea with the US dollar.
And when we say stable coins, we mean tokens that are pegged to US dollar value that require trust in the company.
Yeah, there are tokens that are one-to-one with the dollar. So in a way, you can think of them as exchangeable with the dollar. There are multiple types of them. There are some of them that you trust a third-party entity, like a company that's holding the same, a bank that's holding a similar amount of dollars. That's, say, Tether. There's a lot of penetration of Tether in Argentina. There's also some people using DAI, which is an algorithmic stablecoin. I won't go into the details, but it works in another more complex way and tries to do away with the trust in a third party. But
you add different trust instead.
Yeah, exactly. You have different risks. Like you have to think it in the the layers of risks that you are dealing with.
So would you say that like a Argentinian at the core, the highest demand is dollars. They want US dollars.
Definitely.
They want some kind of exposure to US dollars. Definitely. And they're willing to take some risks, trust-wise, to have that exposure to dollars.
I'd say that definitely. So I'd say that in Argentina, like people relate to Bitcoin and crypto more in general in two different ways. Some people take it as a savings technology, and some people take it as an investment technology. And there's a really interesting local Bitcoin community that's mostly for not either as a savings mechanism or investment mechanism, but for what it means and as a tool for freedom. And so I'd say that there's a little bit of every use case down there. The user is mostly a savings technology, so stable coins are a great fit there. But then Bitcoin is a super great fit either for the people that are in it for the freedom and the social change that Bitcoin brings and means, and for the people that are trying to make an investment. And that's a really interesting audience because that's how you start relating with Bitcoin and start learning more about it. And you might ask the question, well, why is this going up? Why is this the price of Bitcoin going up? And then you start falling through all these other questions and questioning your beliefs. So I think it's a really good path. But yeah, there's a bit of everything.
One of the cool things about Bitcoin is that it's very much a grassroots movement. You know, people talk about open source code, but ultimately people need to run the code. They need to build the code, support the code. Yep. And do you see the Bitcoin community in Argentina growing strongly? And do you see a circular economy developing, this idea of, you know, merchants accepting Bitcoin and then spending Bitcoin?
Definitely. Bitcoin adoption is growing quite a bit. I think you can live in Bitcoin today without ATMs and without selling your Bitcoin. There's at least in the biggest cities, there's in the last year or so, adoption grew quite a lot. you can pay with Lightning Network in many places. You can eat, you can go to the gym, you can do many things paying with Lightning Network, which is awesome. I think that especially like in the last month or so, a lot of people, there was like this big crisis with Terra, which was a stable coin, and a lot of people lost a lot of money because they were relying on a system that didn't work. And it made them ask the right questions, and it made them understand, like, I think that we're seeing a huge comeback to Bitcoin. A lot of people are finally understanding why Bitcoiners were saying what they were saying, and why you have to be careful with these systems, and why it should be sound. So I think that we'll see the rate of adoption grow in the next year or so.
But you can live in a major Argentinian city and earn Bitcoin and spend Bitcoin and never touch dollars or pesos.
Yeah, definitely.
Period.
Yeah, you can. I do.
The Bitcoin future is there.
Yeah.
So Dario, at its core, what does freedom mean to you?
I think that it's the right to have your own opinions, to express them, to behave in line with them, as long as you don't hurt anyone else and you respect others' freedom. Like, I think that's it's tough to define freedom. I think that you shouldn't, like in the modern world, you shouldn't be restricted about the decisions you take about your life and how you relate to others. So I think that's in the end, that's the core of it. Trying to share your beliefs freely, and I think that in order to do that, you need a lot of you need tools that allow you to do this. You need some rights that are usually hard to maintain in different environments. But I'd say that I think that we are in a point of history where we have the most freedom than we've ever had as a humanity. So I think that there are a lot of people rooting for freedom, and it's more and more of the world right now is trying to at least have the ideals of respecting these personal freedoms. So I'm optimistic about the future. I think we're going in the right direction. There's still a lot of work to be done. But yeah, not having anyone tell you what you should do in the end is what freedom is and what we should strive for.
Dario, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you.
Thank you.